welcome to every storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story, but first up we are going to be doing the joke of the day. Then we are going to be doing the Bible. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis. And then we are going to be doing Hands, Feet on High Places. Hi, Granny Bear. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss another video. I'm going to be doing the joke of the day today, so I hope you guys enjoy the joke.
It's going to be joke of the week on Friday. Every Friday.
Okay, Jenny.
What?
Okay. Why was the Egyptian girl worried?
I don't know. Why was the Egyptian girl worried?
Because her daddy was a mummy.
That's really weird. Her daddy was a mummy? What about her mummy was a mummy? Mommy. Are you my mummy?
Okay, Dad.
Okay.
We're inside.
Okay. Hi. I am really sorry that we started so late today. We were watching it's actually the last David Tennant Doctor Who, and it was longer than we thought it was. So there it goes. All right. So I'm going to be reading. I'm sorry, we're running late. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Something similar to what I said. Okay, so this is 2 Peter chapter 2 from the English Standard Version of the Bible, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. I need everybody to pay attention. Got it. All right. So, chapter 2. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false prophets among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality, and because of them the way of truth will be blasphemed. And in their greed they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into Hades, and committed them in chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as the righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority. Bold and willful, they do not tremble as they blaspheme the glorious ones, whereas angels, though greater in might and power, do not pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord. But these, like irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed, blaspheming about matters of which they are ignorant, will also be destroyed in their destruction. Suffering wrong as the wage for their wrongdoing, they count it pleasure to revel in the daytime. They are blots and blemishes, reviling in their deceptions while they feast with you. They have eyes full of adultery, insatiable for sin. They entice unsteady souls. They have hearts trained in greed, accursed children. Forsaking the right way, they have gone astray. They have followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved gain from wrongdoing, but was rebuked for his own transgression. A speechless donkey spoke with human voice and restrained the prophet's madness. These are waterless springs and mists driven by a storm. For them the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved. For speaking loud boasts of folly, they entice by sensual passions of the flesh those who are barely escaping from those who live in error. They promise them freedom, but they themselves are slaves of corruption. For whatever overcomes a person, to that he is enslaved. For if, after they have escaped the defilements of the world, through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the last state has become worse for them than the first. For it would have been better for them never to have known the way of righteousness than, after knowing it, to turn back from the holy commandment delivered to them. What the true proverb says has happened to them. The dog returns to its own vomit, and the sow, after washing herself, returns to wallow in the mire. That's the end of 2 Peter chapter 2. What a wonderful reminder to follow Jesus. All right, now it is time for the synopsis.
With the one, the only, Kimberly.
I don't have to introduce her. JJ just did it. Here she is.
So in the last chapter, much afraid, she decided to, she started climbing to the high places because, and it was really hard looking.
She did it all by herself.
No.
She was super.
Dad, time saving. Come on. So what happened was, the places were so hard that only the animals could make it up to the top without...
Which animals?
Goats and deer.
Goats and deer.
Yeah,
Right.
JJ said it before I could. But then what happened is she goes up to the mountain and she camps in this cave and she meets the flower of forgiveness. And that is the second letter of the alphabet of love. And then she's on her way up to the top, and she is, I think, climbing Mount Injury, which is a weird name for a mountain.
Why is every mountain...
And at one point she scraped her hands on the rock because she slipped, and that she did do something that made them better. I could explain it. I could explain it much better if I had more time, but we are running out of that, so I'm gonna hand it off to Dad.
Okay. We're not actually out of time. We started late, and I apologize for that. So we are on now chapter 11. In the forests with a plural, of danger and tribulation. With what joy they welcomed the shepherd as he sat down in their midst, and after cheerfully congratulating them on having surmounted the precipice, he laid his hands gently on the wounds which Much Afraid had received when she fell, and immediately they were healed. Then he began to speak to them about the way which lay ahead. You have now to go through the forests which clothe the sides of these mountains, almost up to the snow line. The way will be steep, but you will come to resting places here and there. There are the forests of danger and tribulation, and often the pine trees grow so tall and so closely together that the path may seem quite dark. Storms are very frequent up here on the slopes, but keep pressing forward, for remember that nothing can do you any real harm while you are following the path of my will. It did seem strange that even after safely surmounting so many difficulties and steep places, including the impassable precipice just below them, Much Afraid should remain so like her name, but so it was. No sooner did the shepherd pronounce the words danger and tribulation than she began to shake and tremble all over again. The forests of danger and tribulation, she repeated with a piteous quaver in her voice. "O shepherd, wherever will you lead me next?" "To the next stage on the way to the high places," he answered her promptly, smiling at her as nicely as possible. "I wonder if you will ever be able to get me up there," groaned poor little foolish Much Afraid. groaned. Poor foolish little Much Afraid. I wonder you continue to bother me and don't give up the job altogether. It looks as though I never shall have anything but lame feet, and that even you won't be able to make them like Hinds' feet. She looked disconsolately.
Disconsolately.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Disconsolately at her feet. I mean, I can tell what it means, but how do you pronounce it? At her feet as she spoke. Certainly, at the moment, they did look even more crooked than ever. I am not a man that I should lie, said the shepherd gravely. Look at me, Much Afraid. Do you believe that I will deceive you? Have I said, and shall I not do it? Or have I spoken, and shall I not make it good? Much Afraid trembled a little, partly at the tone of his voice, and partly because she was still much afraid by nature, and was already trying to picture what the forest of danger and tribulation would be like. That always had a disastrous effect upon her, but she answered penitently, No, I know that you are not a man who would lie to me. I know that you will make good what you have said. Then, said the shepherd, speaking very gently again, I am going to lead you through danger and tribulation, Much Afraid, but you need not be the least bit afraid, for I shall be with you. Even if I lead you through the valley of the shadow itself, you need not fear, for my rod and my staff will comfort you. Then he added, Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in the darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. Though 1,000 fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, it shall not come nigh thee. For I will cover thee with my feathers, and under my wings shalt thou trust. Psalm 91, 4-7. The gentleness of his voice as he said these things was indescribable. Then Much Afraid knelt at his feet and built yet another altar and said, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Then, because she found that even as she spoke, her teeth were chattering with fright, and her hands had gone quite clammy, she looked up into his face and added, For thou art not a man that thou shouldst lie, nor the Son of Man that thou shouldst repent. Hast thou said, and shalt thou not do it? And hast thou spoken, and shalt thou not make it good? Then the shepherd smiled more comfortingly than ever before, laid both hands on her head, and said, Be strong, yea, be strong, and fear not. Then he continued, Much Afraid, don't ever allow yourself to begin trying to picture what it will be like. Believe me, when you get to the places which you dread, you will find that they are as different as possible from what you have imagined, just as was the case when you were actually ascending the precipice. I must warn you that I see your enemies lurking among the trees ahead, and if you ever let craven fear begin painting a picture on the screen of your imagination, you will walk with fear and trembling and agony where no fear is. When he had said this, he picked up another stone from the place where she was kneeling, and gave it to her. Excuse me. And gave it to her to put with the other memorial stones. Then he went his way, and Much Afraid and her companions started on the path which led up through the forests. Almost as soon as they had reached the trees, they saw the face of mean, sickly self-pity looking out from behind one of the trunks. He gabbled ever so quickly before he dodged back into hiding. I say, Much Afraid, this really is a bit too thick. I mean, whatever will he do next, forcing a poor little lame, frightened creature like yourself to go through dangers which only the brave, strong men ought to be expected to face? Really, your shepherd is almost more of a bully than craven fear himself. Hardly had he stopped before resentment put his head out and said crossly, There's absolutely no reason for it either, because there's another perfectly good path which skirts the forest altogether and brings you right up to the snow line without going anywhere near these unnecessary dangers. Everybody else goes that way, so why shouldn't you? Tell him... Excuse me. Tell him you won't go this way, much afraid, and insist on being taken by the usual path. This way is for martyrs only, and you, my dear, don't fit into that picture at all. Then Craven Fear leered at her for a moment and said contemptuously, So, you think you're going to become a little heroine, do you? And go singing through the forest of danger? What will you bet, much afraid, that you won't end up shrieking and screaming like a maniac, maimed for the rest of your life? Bitterness was next to speak, and sneered from behind another tree. He would do this. It's just as I told you, after you have dutifully gone through one terrifying experience, he's always got something still worse lying ahead of you. Then Pride, who was still limping badly and seemed extra venomous as a result, said, You know, he won't be able to rest content until he has put you to complete shame, because that's the way he produces that precious humility he's so crazy about. He'll humble you to the dust, much afraid, and leave you a groveling idiot in front of everyone. Much Afraid and her companions walked on without answering, and without taking any notice, but as before, Much Afraid discovered that she limped more painfully whenever she heard what they said. It was really terribly perplexing to know what to do. If she listened, she limped, and if she put her fingers in her ears, she couldn't accept the hands of her two guides, which meant that she stumbled and slipped. So they stopped for a moment or two and discussed the matter, and then Suffering opened the little first aid kit hanging at her girdle, took out some cotton, and firmly plugged the ears of Much Afraid. Although this was uncomfortable, it did seem to have the desired effect, at least temporarily, for when the 5 sulkers saw that they could not make her hear them, they soon tired of bawling at her and left her alone until another opportunity should occur for badgering her again. At first the forest did not really seem too dreadful. Perhaps it was that up there on the mountains the air was so fresh and strong that it made those who breathed it fresh and strong too. Also, the sun was still shining, and Much Afraid began to feel a sensation which was completely new to her, a thrill of excitement and incredible, and, as it seemed, of almost pleasurable adventure. Here she was, lame Much Afraid, actually walking through the forest of danger, and not really minding. This lasted for quite a time, until huge black clouds gradually rolled over the sky, and the sun went in. In the distance thunder rolled, and the woods became dark and very still. Suddenly a bolt of lightning scorched across the sky, and somewhat ahead of them was a rending crash as a great forest tree fell to the earth. Then another, and another. Then the storm in all its fury was bursting around them, thunder rolling, lightning sizzling, and crackling in every direction, until the whole forest seemed to be groaning and shaking and falling about them. The strangest thing was that though Much Afraid felt a shuddering thrill go through her at every crash, she was not really afraid. That is, she felt neither panic nor desire to run, nor even real dread, for she kept repeating to herself, Though 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right side, it shall not come nigh thee. For I will cover thee with my feathers, and under my wings shalt thou trust.
I really need you to settle.
Can I go to bed?
Yeah, go. Leave your door open, please.
So throughout the whole storm she was filled with a strange and wonderful peace, such as she had never felt before, and walked between her two companions, saying to herself, I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord. At last the storm began to rumble off into the distance, the crashes died down, and there was a quiet lull. The three women stopped to wring the water out of their clothes and hair and try to tidy themselves. As they did this, Craven Fear appeared near them again and yelled at the top of his voice, "I say, much afraid, the storm has only gone round the mountains for a short time. Already it is beginning to approach again, and will be worse than before. Make a bolt back down the path as quickly as you can, and get away from those dangerous trees before it starts again, or you will be killed. There is just time for you to make a good escape." "Look here," exclaimed Much Afraid, most unexpectedly, water still dripping from her hair and her sodden skirts clinging like wet rags around her legs. "I can't stand that fellow shouting at me any longer. Please help me, both of you." And setting the example, she stooped down, picked up a stone, and flung it straight at Craven Fear. Her two companions actually laughed for the very first time and started hurling a barrage of stones among the trees where the five were lurking. In a moment or two, none of the enemies were visible. Then, just ahead of them, through the trees, they saw a log hut which seemed to offer a promise of shelter and protection from the storm, which certainly was again drawing nearer. Hurrying toward the cabin, they found that it stood in a clearing well away from the trees, and when they tried the door latch, to their joy it opened, and they thankfully slipped inside. With great presence of mind, suffering immediately, closed the door and bolted it behind them, and none too soon. Next minute, their enemies were banging on the door and shouting, "Hi, I say, open the door and let us in. The storm is starting again. You can't be so inhuman as to shut us outside and leave us to our fate." Much Afraid went to the door and shouted through the keyhole the advice they had offered her. "Make a bolt down the path as quickly as you can, and get away from these dangerous trees, or you will be killed. You have just time to make good your escape before the storm starts again." There was a sound of muttered curses outside, then of hurrying feet fading away into the distance, and it seemed as though this time the advice was being acted upon. Back rolled the storm, fiercer and more terrible than before, and they were safely sheltered in the hut, out of range of the crashing trees, and their shelter proved perfectly weatherproof, for not a drop came through the roof. They found in the room a supply of firewood stacked beside a small kitchen range with a kettle and some saucepans on it. While Suffering busied herself lighting the fire, Sorrow held the kettle under a spout outside the window and filled it with rainwater. Much Afraid went to the cupboard on the wall to see if it would yield any treasure. Sure enough, there was crockery on the shelves and a supply of tinned foods, as well as a big tin of unleavened biscuits. So in a very little time, while the storm still furiously raged and rattled outside, there they were, sitting around a crackling fire, warming themselves and drying their sopping garments while they drank comforting hot cocoa and satisfied their hunger. Though the uproar of the tempest without was almost deafening, and the hut shuddered and shook in every blast, yet inside was nothing but peace and thanksgiving and cheerful contentment. Much Afraid found herself thinking with astonished awe that it was really the happiest and most peaceful experience during the whole of her journey up till that time. As they lay down on the mattresses which they discovered piled in another part of the hut, she repeated again to herself very softly, "He has covered me with his feathers, and under his wings I do trust." The storm continued with great violence for 2 or 3 days, but while it lasted, the 3 travelers rested quietly in the shelter of the hut, going outside only during the brief lulls to gather wood. This they dried in the oven to replenish the stock they were using, so that others following on behind might not be left without fuel. There seemed to be a good store of tinned foods and unleavened biscuits, and they supposed that some of the shepherd's servants must visit the hut from time to time with a new supply. During those quiet days, in the midst of the raging tempest, Much Afraid came to know her two companions in a new way, and also to understand more of the mountain dialect which they spoke. In some strange way, she began to feel that they were becoming real friends, and not just attendants whom the shepherd had commanded to go with her guides and helpers. She found, too, that now she was accepting their companionship in this way. She seemed more alive than ever before to beauty and delight in the world around her. It seemed as though her senses had been quickened in some extraordinary way, enabling her to enjoy every little detail of her life, so that although her companions actually were sorrow and suffering, she often felt an almost inexplicable joy and pleasure at the same time. This would happen when she looked at the bright, crackling flames in the log fire, or listened to the sound of lashing rain overhead, emphasizing the safety and peace within the hut, or when she saw through the window the tossing trees waving their arms against the background of scurrying clouds, or lightning-rent sky, or again, very early before daybreak, when she saw that morning star shining serenely through a rift in the clouds, or heard the clear, jubilant note of a bird during a lull in the storm. All these things seemed to be speaking to her in the mountain dialect, and to her growing astonishment she found it in an incredibly beautiful language, so that sometimes her eyes filled with tears of pure joy, and her heart seemed so full of ecstasy that she could hardly bear it. One morning, when the storm was rattling and raging through the forest louder than ever, she noticed Sorrow sitting by the fire, singing quietly to herself, the words, of course, being in the mountain dialect, which Much Afraid was learning to understand. This is the best translation that I can give, but you will realize that the original was much more beautiful and full of forest sounds and music. How lovely and how nimble are thy feet, O prince's daughter! They flash and sparkle and can run more fleet than running water. On all the mountains there is no gazelle, no roe or hind, can overtake thee, nor can leap as well, but lag behind. Canticles 7:11. 7:1. I must have seen double there for a second. Why, Sorrow, exclaimed Much Afraid, I didn't know that you could sing, nor even that you knew any songs. Sorrow answered quietly, Neither did I. But on the way up here through the forest I found the words and tune coming into my head just as I am singing them now. I like it, said Much Afraid. It makes me think of the time when I shall have hinds feet myself. And so it is comforting, and the tune is so nice and springy. It makes me want to jump. She laughed at the thought of her crooked feet being able to jump, then coaxed, Teach me the song, please do. So Sorrow sang it over several times, until Much Afraid knew it perfectly, and went about the hut humming it to herself, trying to picture what it would be like to be a gazelle leaping on the mountains, and able to jump from crag to crag, just as the shepherd did. When the day came for her to receive her hinds feet, she would be able to follow him wherever he went. The picture was so lovely, she could hardly wait for it to come true. Chapter 12, In the Mist. The first word is at, and because we're on a time limit right now, we're looking at 12 pages. Go or no go? All right, Mom says no go. We're on a time limit right now. So we will try to make that up with our reading on Thursday. No reading tomorrow because it's Wednesday.
Well,
Maybe we could. We'll see. All right, more to follow. Obviously, if we tune in, then we'll be reading tomorrow, and I will post it on YouTube. So if you're not able to make it on Wednesday because we're not used to Wednesdays, then that's fine.
Is
Um,
Becca on?
I don't think so. All right. Ah! Okay. There's JJ. Bye.
Peekaboo.
Okay, I think Kimmy wants to show us a picture. Here she is. Wow. She's getting really good at drawing little girls. Awesome. Okay, so I am going to put my bookmark in the book.
Bookmark in the book.
And we are, actually it's a lot closer to the end because I realized that the last part of it is not part of the story. It's the lessons learned part. And
We're really close.
more to follow on whether or not I'm going to read all of that because I think that I think that possibly the kids aren't going to follow it very well. So we might skip that. Anyhow, I hope that everyone is having a good night, and we will talk to you later. Again, I'm sorry for starting late, and I'm sorry that we are on a time limit and have to stop early. But you guys have a good night, and God bless you. We'll see you later.